welcome to Lesson 11 of this Elizabeth I GCSE Remote Learning Series. This one focuses on Mary Queen of Scots' execution and the consequences of that. You will need your lesson notes booklet. You should be aware of this by now. It will have been sent to you. It will be on class chart, or it will be in a link in the description section of this video. Right, let's get started. Now, there are some all new features in this part of the lesson series. The little video clips that we will be watching are now embedded inside this video, so there is no need to open up separate tabs and links or anything like that. The videos will play automatically as part of this video, so that should make things easier. We are going to start, and you'll need to be on page 2 of your lesson notes booklet for this, with a smart tab. This task is going to focus on Mary Queen of Scots, and you will need to recall some of the information that you completed in Lesson 7. So what you need to do is to try and write down in the space provided in the booklet, or just on a separate bit of paper if you're using a separate bit of paper, all of the things you can remember about how Mary Queen of Scots posed a problem for Elizabeth. So you pause this now and have a go at recalling some of those problems. Okay, welcome back. And some of the things that you should have written down, and again, you can check your answers back against what you did in Lesson 7. Fundamentally, Mary Queen of Scots is a threat to Elizabeth because Elizabeth doesn't have any children. So when she doesn't have an heir to the throne, this means that Mary Queen of Scots, who is next in line to the throne, she is a threat. Because if people replaced Elizabeth, so if they killed Elizabeth, dethroned her, then Mary Queen of Scots would be available to take over the throne, and as a Catholic, she could restore Catholicism. Mary Queen of Scots then has a son, James I. So she not only is next in line, but she has an heir, which is something that Elizabeth doesn't have. Remember that Mary has extensive contacts in France because of her marriage to the heir to the French throne. She has also connections with the Spanish because they are Catholic, and so is Mary Queen of Scots. And Mary poses an increasing threat after she moves to England, and she is kept under house arrest by Elizabeth. And it's the fact that she moves to England in the late 1560s and is under house arrest. She is there as somebody who people can potentially gather around, somebody who people can use as a figurehead for their rebellion. And so we can see that, and remember this work that you did in Lesson 7, that relations between Elizabeth and Mary begin to deteriorate from the late 1560s onwards, and Mary is a figurehead for the Northern Rebellion, which is the first major threat to Elizabeth in 1569. She is also the figurehead for other plots, like, for example, the Throckmorton plot and the Babington plot. So Mary posed a great danger to Elizabeth, and ultimately Elizabeth had to weigh up the cost-benefit of either Mary staying alive, was that more of a threat, or was killing Mary going to provoke more of a threat? So for the next section of the lesson, we want to focus on 3 key questions. What was Mary's involvement in the Babington plot, which is probably the most serious plot that she was involved in? Why did Elizabeth finally make the decision to have her executed? And finally, what was the significance of that decision? What you're going to see now is a little clip from one of the documentaries that was used in Lesson 7. It just focuses on that decision that Elizabeth made to have Mary Queen of Scots executed. So focus on what was her involvement in the plot, why did Elizabeth take the decision that she did to have Mary executed, and what was the significance of that. And when you've finished watching this, I'll direct you to some of the reading in your lesson notes pack, and there's a place where you can try and answer those questions.
James, who's now approaching adulthood, decides he's going to ditch his mum.
The last thing he wanted was a discredited mother back, messing things up and getting in the way.
Was there ever a sight so detestable detestable and impious before God and man than an only child despoiling his mother of her crown and royal estate. There is no King of Scotland, nor any queen but me.
What it does is it forces Mary to say, I got to get out of here. And from this point, she's willing to listen to even desperate plots.
Having lost all hope of regaining her crown or convincing Elizabeth to help her, Mary becomes obsessed with getting Elizabeth's crown.
I will not leave my prison save as Queen of England.
Burghley suspects Mary is plotting to have Elizabeth killed and trying to make England Catholic again. So he sends his spies out to get proof.
Mary becomes this romanticized figurehead for a generation of young men educated in the Catholic colleges in France, in Rome, and in the Netherlands, who want to give their lives for their faith.
It doesn't take long before a young man writes to Mary. Burghley's trap is set.
Anthony Babington is a young, not very bright, but enthusiastic Catholic gentleman with too much money and a lot of time on his hands.
He writes to her and he says that he will help spring her from her imprisonment, and at the same time, 6 gentlemen will do the deed. They will assassinate Elizabeth.
There be 6 noble gentlemen, all my private friends, who, for the zeal they bear the Catholic cause and your Majesty's service, will undertake the execution.
Everyone's waiting. Burghley's waiting. Babington's waiting for Mary's reply. And 12 days later, it comes. She basically damns herself in that letter.
The affairs being thus prepared, and forces in readiness both without and within the realm, then shall it be time to put the 6 gentlemen to work upon the accomplishing of their design.
Babington's promising her ships and soldiers, and there never were any. There were no ships, there were no soldiers, there were no loyal Catholics waiting to carry her to elegance and luxury and freedom such as she'd known in her childhood. It was all a fantasy, and what's terribly, terribly sad is that Mary still believed it.
Burghley's spies bring him a copy of Mary's letter, but will it be enough to condemn her to death?
I hope that God, which hath given us the light to discover this great conspiracy, will also give assistance to punish it.
Any sympathy Elizabeth ever had for Mary is gone.
Well, what do you think of your Queen of Scotland? With black ingratitude and treachery, she tries to kill me, who so often saved her life. Now, I am certain of her evil intent. It may be she will not have another opportunity to behave like this.
Despite the proof, Elizabeth can't bring herself to condemn Mary.
She felt guilty. She felt terrified that God would judge her on the last day for putting to death a divine right ruler. And, she probably felt upset and annoyed that she'd been boxed into this situation that she never wanted to be in, that she had managed to avoid for most of her reign.
Instead, she turns her rage on the young plotters.
Babington and his associates were hanged on the gibbet. They were cut down while still alive, and they had their private parts chopped off in front of them. They were eviscerated. Their entrails were burnt in front of them, and then they were executed, and then they were quartered. And what's really gruesome about this is that Elizabeth asks Burghley if he could come up with something else. And Burghley assures her that if it's done properly, i.e. if they're cut down soon enough so that they can witness their own evisceration, then it would be pain enough.
On October the 25th, 1586, Mary is pronounced guilty of conspiring to murder Elizabeth.
I am quite ready and very happy to die, and to shed my blood for God Almighty, my Saviour and my Creator.
So the sentence was proclaimed. But even then, Elizabeth wouldn't do anything. Why? She just wanted it all to go away. She didn't want to be the source of the execution of an anointed queen.
If it had pleased God to have made us both milkmaids with pails on our arms, so that the matter rested between us two, and that I knew she should still seek my destruction, yet could I not consent to her death.
This is my own personal speculation, but I think she wanted Mary dead. She knew that Mary had to die, but when it came to it, she couldn't quite bring herself to believe that she was the person who was striking Mary's head off.
Out very.
To bounce Elizabeth into making this decision, she is told by Burleigh, and this, when I first discovered this in the archives, I could hardly believe it. She's told by Burleigh that the Spanish Armada has landed a year early in Wales.
Burleigh invents a full-scale invasion to push her into signing.
The realm will be in great danger, principally the person of your majesty.
Burleigh tells the Queen to double her guards. Who knows what might happen? She calls for the warrant, and she signs.
She signs it after they've been pressuring her to do it, and suddenly it's done.
Burleigh quickly sends off the executioners.
But then, almost immediately, Elizabeth acts as if she didn't know what she was signing. I was given a whole pile of papers by my secretary. He should have told me that top of the pile was the warrant for the execution of the Queen of Scots. So she blames everybody but herself. All the time, she's trying to wash her hands of the blood of Mary, but they are covered in it.
After 19 years of confinement, Mary is suddenly told that she will die the next morning at Fotheringay Castle, February the 8th, 1587.
I did not think the Queen, my sister, would have consented to my death. But seeing that your pleasure is so, death shall be to me most welcome. Do not accuse me of presumption, if on the eve of leaving this world and preparing myself for a better one, I remind you that one day you will have to answer for your charge.
Mary had decided that she would die a death that would always be remembered. She was going to go for a Catholic martyrdom. If she couldn't win in life, she would triumph in death.
Mary may not have had much sense, but what she did have was great style. And right until the end, she kept that up.
She's dressed in black. She's got a cross in one hand, a Latin prayer book in the other. There's a rosary around her wrist.
I hope you shall make an end to all my troubles.
She shows charity to her executioner. She consoles her weeping ladies.
Under her outer garments, she's dressed in tawny red, the colour of martyrdom.
There's even sort of gallows humour that you get. So she jokes with her executioner that she hasn't had such a servant undressing her before, and certainly not in front of the audience that she had there.
I have never taken off my clothes before such a company. Immanus tuus Domine, commendo spiritum meum. 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 Immanus tuus Domine, Immanus tuus Domine, Immanus tuus Domine.
The first stroke goes right into the back of the neck. She continues praying, into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit, in Latin. The second blow goes really 9/10 of the way, but he finishes it off using the axe as a meat cleaver. The headsman picks up the head as you do and say, God save the Queen, except that, of course, Mary was wearing a wig, so the head rolls off the stage like a football.
In a sense, it's a terribly fitting kind of end, because, like so much of Mary Queen of Scots' life, it's theatrical. And very good theatre this time.
In my end is my beginning.
In my end is my beginning. That was so apt. She's been immortalized after her death in many ways as the ultimate doomed heroine, the damsel in distress. Also as a figure of Scots nationalism in a way against those beastly English. And perhaps above all, she is the ultimate Catholic martyr.
We will never be sure what Elizabeth really felt for her cousin, but Mary's execution marked her forever.
This is something Elizabeth never got over. She always denied that she'd been responsible for Mary's death. She lied point blank to James that she was responsible. She blamed her counsellors.
I would you know, though not felt, the extreme pain which overwhelms my mind for that miserable accident. Far contrary to my meaning, I beseech you, God and many more know how innocent I am in this case.
After 26 years of never having met Mary, Elizabeth now finds she's left it too late. History will have to decide who won their battle.
It may seem that the winner is obvious. It is Elizabeth. She has put to death Mary, Queen of Scots. She's vanquished her rival in the end. But arguably, Mary has the last laugh because it's her son James who becomes King of England when Elizabeth dies without any children of her own, without anyone else to leave the throne to. She's forced to leave it to the son of her greatest rival.
Okay, so you will see that in your lesson notes pack on page 3, you have this information and you have some information that comes after it. Building on what you have just looked at in that documentary, there are also 3 questions, which you can either answer in that booklet or you can just answer them on a separate piece of paper. What was Mary, Queen of Scots' involvement in the Babington plot? Why did Elizabeth finally decide to have her executed? And for Elizabeth, what were the consequences of having Mary, Queen of Scots, executed? So pause now and have a go at answering those questions. Okay, welcome back. Now, what you should have got from that reading there is that in terms of the question, what was her involvement in the Babington plot? Well, she was involved, but also she was becoming increasingly reckless, and Walsingham used his spies to be able to get information on her. It may be that she wasn't as committed in the first instance to this plot, but as time went on she became more and more reckless, and that's what made her end up getting involved in the plot. But she was also captured by Walsingham's spies in the act quite well, and that he gave her enough rope to hang herself with, let's say that. He gave her enough chance to get herself into trouble, and she obliged and did so. And given that situation, Elizabeth had very little choice really but to execute her, and had a huge amount of pressure put on her by her advisors and by Parliament to remove Mary because they saw what a huge threat Mary was. Now, again, some people think, oh, Mary Queen of Scots was executed, and so Philip sent the Armada. And we'll be looking at the Armada in the next few lessons, but he didn't send it just because of that. He gave him maybe one more chance, but actually one more reason, to do so. But he didn't send the Armada because she was executed. He was already going to send the Armada. But what it did do is it removed a threat, but at the same time it antagonized lots and lots of Catholics. So it made a martyr of Mary, which gave Catholics a figurehead, so that even though she wasn't around to be able to physically take over the throne, it still inspired some people who saw her as a martyr, who wanted to remove Elizabeth and wanted to put Catholicism back as the main religion in England. So Mary's execution is significant because in some respects it removes the threat that was there. In some respects it removes the threat that had been around since the 1560s, but it also makes a martyr out of Mary, and it also potentially antagonizes Philip of Spain to the extent that it's the final straw that makes him decide he wants to send the Armada. And on her deathbed, Mary passed her claim to the throne on to Philip, so he would have been the next Catholic monarch who could have deposed Elizabeth. Okay, so this now brings us to the last section of the lesson, where we are looking at this. You've got a copy of this little diagram that shows some of the problems that Elizabeth faced, and really we've dealt with two of them, the English Catholics and the plots of the Throckmorton plot, the Babington plot, Mary Queen of Scots we've dealt with, the two underneath, Spain and the Dutch Revolt. Those are problems that we're going to have a look at in the next two lessons. The problem of Spain was growing and growing and growing. Now, if we look back to this slide that we saw right at the start of lesson 1 of this series of lessons, we can see that we are now firmly into the yellow section, the key topic 2. You can see that it talks about plots and revolts at home. You've done that. You've dealt with Mary Queen of Scots. It then talks about relations with Spain, which is what we're going to move on to. And it talks about the outbreak of war with Spain. It talks about the role of Sir Francis Drake there and the Spanish Armada. And that's coming up in 2 lessons' time. And that brings us to this fella, Philip II of Spain. Now, there's a little section at the end of your lesson underneath that diagram about the problems that Elizabeth had. It says problems with Spain. There's a few things you can jot down there that we need to be aware of before we move to the next lesson. So Spain is by this point England's major rival. Spain is by this point a major threat to England. Spain is the major Catholic power in Europe. Increasingly, as there are explorations by English sailors, English pirates, that brings them into lots of conflict with the Spanish Empire, and that causes tension. And Spain is in control of the Spanish Netherlands, which is geographically very close to England. And those Spanish Netherlands are in a series of revolts with the Protestant Dutch revolting against their Catholic Spanish leaders, but actually also some Catholic Dutch who are revolting against Spanish control. They don't want to be controlled by a foreign power. And Elizabeth is getting increasingly entangled with that. So in the next lesson, we will shift our attention to those problems with Spain and see how they caused increasing conflict, which eventually led to the Spanish Armada. And so that brings us to the end of this lesson 11 on Mary Queen of Scots, her execution and the consequences. It sets us up nicely for our next lesson as we delve more deeply into the relationship with the Spanish and then the sending of the Spanish Armada. So, until next time, stay safe, take care, goodbye.